Hey, good afternoon, good morning. Are we running? Yeah, we're running. Sorry, I always have to look. I need a little mirror on the side of the camera. Anyway, welcome to Relove Guitars Workshop. I'm Sam, and this is a couple of quick videos I'm doing one after another. And I say quick, I mean quick for me, which is under 3 hours. No, I'm going to try and keep it reasonably short. Okay, so first one, I want to do a quick video about neck pocket cracks. This is prompted by a question asked on YouTube, and the person asked about the neck pocket cracks that you often find down in the corners here of guitars like this. Not always the same guitar. Where else would it be? Okay, there, and bang, there. Okay, so lots of bolt-on neck guitars that have that sort of cut-out pocket arrangement, heel pocket arrangement, end up with cracks in the corners. Now, and this applies to whether it's a Fender style guitar like this one, or Strat style, or whether it's a Ibanez style, or any bolt-on neck guitar that has basically this open side here with a little ledge there. I don't know how do you call this joint, a little square, a little right angle joint there, and a right angle joint there, not in the same plane, actually in two different planes, but it's still a right angle joint, or it kind of makes, if you look at it in two dimensions, it makes a kind of right angle joint. Anyway, I'll hopefully make sense of that a bit later on. But the point being is, lots of these guitars will have these little neck pocket cracks, and there's a kind of, if you want to get involved in a never-ending debate about these things, you'll find people online who swear blind that these cracks are only in the lacquer, and then you'll have other people who, like me, will say that the cracks are in the wood itself. Interestingly, in over 200 plus guitars that I've serviced or set up, you'll notice, I've noticed that the people who claim the cracks are only in the lacquer are the sellers, because they want you to buy the guitar and they don't want you to be worried about any structural damage to the guitar. And the people who probably think that it's actually more than that are the buyers. The buyers who get it and set it up, or do it up and sell it on. So the point is, my experience has shown that, and I don't know the science behind this, I'm just going on sort of really basic physics, but my experience has shown that it's always, almost always, if not always, as I wrote on my YouTube reply, almost always, or always a crack in the timber underlying the lacquer. Now, the logic behind that isn't just sitting around thinking about it or arguing or discussing it online. The basis for my conclusion about that is experience, having bought loads of guitars with little cracks down there from people who said, oh no, it's just a lacquer crack, honest, it's got nothing to do, no structural crack at all, it's not in the wood, I've checked it, blah blah blah. In every case I've checked it, and it is, albeit imperceptibly in some cases, and in some cases extremely visible, it's in the wood. Now, the reason for that conclusion is, first of all, experiential, having explored it physically many times. But the second one, there's a kind of law of physics or mechanics involved here, and it's to do with right angles, and it's to do with stress. So what you think about what you've got here, you've got a neck heel on a piece of wood that's being put into as snugly as possible into a pocket that's cut out waiting to receive it. And once you squeeze that in, most of us, when we're making these things or putting these things together, we want it to be as snug as possible, and then we put some big bolts in and we put a huge amount of torque onto those bolts to pull this neck into this pocket. Now, it doesn't take many microns for that force of the bolts pulling this, maybe fractionally by, a couple of microns or thousandths of an inch, oversized neck heel into that pocket, and you've got an unbearable force acting on the wood of the pocket. and what happens is it splits in the corner, and it splits in the corner because of the sort of laws of physics. If you remember that the arch or the curve is the strongest shape in nature or in manufacturing and construction, the right angle is a dangerous kind of shape really, because it builds up stress in the corner, and the stress will run along the straight planes and it will shed itself through the corner structure, through the angle there. And there's a really gruesome example of this, I suppose. One of the things that in the aerospace industry that they realised this years ago. If any of you have ever looked into or remember was it de Havilland Comet? I think it was, wasn't it? The first jet airliner with its two little sort of elliptical engines on each wing. And that, in its day, in the late 50s or mid 50s, that was the early 60s. I can't remember now. But anyway, it was the kind of wonder of the age. This brand new jet-powered airliner, and it all went really well until a couple of them mysteriously vanished mid-Atlantic and were found to have fallen out of the sky with the loss of all lives on board. And so they grounded them all, and they put the Comet through the first, probably in history, the first ever massively rigorous testing sort of thing, because they had to find out what was causing this thing to just disintegrate in midair. And through a whole kind of complex accident reconstruction, which was pretty groundbreaking for its day, including, I think, one of the key pieces of evidence was the imprint of a penny, an old English penny of the day, in the side of the tail stabilizer, I think it was, showed how the thing had come apart and how things had left the cabin and sort of strewn out behind the plane. Anyway, they basically traced it down to the failure of the windows, the passenger windows in the plane. And the reason they failed, and this was totally unknown until the time, was that they were, to all intents and purposes, square. Okay, and if you look back in the sort of airline history books, you'll notice a lot of aircraft before those days. I mean, they weren't pressurized high altitude aircraft. They were, you know, sort of low altitude, medium pressurized or whatever propeller stuff. But you'd notice that the windows were often square. It seemed thought a good idea. You know, windows are square in your house, so make them square in an aircraft. Anyway, the point was that under massive repeat pressurization of the aircraft, repeated stress built up, and it vented itself in the corner of the windows by cracking. And then one day, when pressurized up at 30,000 feet or whatever, that repeated stressing of those corners eventually gave way, and the aircraft blew apart in midair. And it failed around the window, and the rest is history, and it all the bits and people and whatever flew out the window, and the whole thing fell apart. So it's traced down, and it was probably the first point in aviation history or aviation science or whatever that they realised that you just couldn't make an aircraft with round windows, square windows, which is why you'll never see aircraft with square windows anymore. Now, somebody might find one that is, but if they have done, they will have somehow negated the stress forces on the corners. But any aircraft you go on to go on holiday or whatever, you'll see it has oval or round windows because they spread the load, the pressurization load, and they don't create any unnecessary weak points. Now, the principle applies here is that these joints, the way this neck, this kind of guitar was designed, has angles, right angles, whether they're in 2 dimensions, there's really 3 dimensions here, which is it goes this way and then that way, it's 3 dimensions, but it's still a corner. And whether it's this one here, which is in 2 dimensions effectively, which, sorry, you can't see very well, which goes right angle in the same plane. The bottom line is you've got sharp angles here, and all it takes is for a slightly oversized pocket to be rammed into, a heel to be rammed into that pocket and bolted on with a huge amount of force. When you think about what you're actually doing with 4 of those bolts, that pulling that neck into that pocket will split the wood. And excuse me, I did exactly the same just the other day with one of my little oak casters, and did the same, yeah. Pulled it in, it was a fraction too big, and the resulting tiny little crack in there. I saw it developing before it was too late, stopped, took it out, skimmed down the width of the neck heel before it did any further damage. But the point is, it's incredibly easy to do that, and even a well-fitting neck heel going into this pocket can be tightened so much that it also ends up putting undue stress on the joint. The other thing, of course, is even if you don't have that, think about the kind of use of this this instrument. All right, all you have to do is bang this neck very lightly to put a huge amount of force onto these onto this joint here, and in either direction, up or down, you're basically magnifying the force through this lever, this long arm, into this corner here, and the amount of force transmitted through either point, depending on whichever way it's banged. It doesn't have to be banged very hard. You don't even need to see any damage here. You could just, I could be turning it around and knock it against a post. And the load has to go somewhere. Now it will be shed in some of the elasticity of the neck, which is saving grace of wood, but it will also shed itself if it needs to. If rather than break this apart, it'll shed it through the joint down there into the corners like we see. Now the thing about this, if you think logically, people say, oh well, it's only the lacquer, and you have to ask yourself, well, what would make the lacquer split at the points on the body which are subject to mechanical stress, right? The wood is subject to mechanical stress, not the lacquer. If you think about the forces on lacquer, people say, well, the shrinkage of the body in such and such climates, it will cause the lacquer to crack. Well, think about it. The lacquer is an even surface all over this thing. Why would lacquer crack only in the place that is characteristic of mechanical stress, right? Why wouldn't the lacquer just suddenly crack here on this flat plane, right? Why wouldn't it crack somewhere around where there's a screw that's gone into it? Why wouldn't it crack on the corner of the horns where it's, I don't know, under stretchy stress or something? It's coincidental, and it's not I'm being sarcastic, but it's not coincidental that the people who would have you believe that lacquer spontaneously cracks because the wood underneath it is stretching or expanding or doing some stuff. They would have you believe that it oh so coincidentally cracks at exactly the same place where wood cracks when it's subject to high mechanical force, right? It's not credible. And if you think about it, the reason why lacquer cracks where the wood cracks is because the underlying wood is cracked. It's Occam's razor. And it's far more likely that that's going to happen because we ram these things on under excessive force, we bang them about, the body gets donked and the neck stays in the same place, and therefore you get this turning motion around here. It's always going to put the force, mechanical force, into those stress points. Now, why does the lacquer crack? Well, it's obvious. It's attached to the underlying wood. From the primer upwards, it's a continuous sticky layer. It can't do anything but crack when the wood underneath splits. Now, the problem with splitting wood is you can't see it very easily, and that's why a lot of sellers, they're not being malicious or cynical. Sellers are often governed by two things. One is they have a kind of positive bias to there's an affirmation bias. You don't want to think your guitar is damaged because you want to sell it and you want somebody to pay a good price for it. So you go for the explanation that most suits what you want to believe, which is it's a great condition guitar and there's just a little lack of crack, and all guitars have those. So you say that and you believe in it. And the other thing is, of course, is that they can't see, even if they look at the crack, or they take the neck out of the pocket and you look in there, you can't see the wood crack. What you can do is you can prise it apart and you can begin to see it. That's one way you can do it if you're courageous enough. But the average seller will, if they take the neck off, they won't see the crack. It will just look like a mass of solid wood, and that will also add to their analysis that that it's just the lacquer that's cracked. So I hope that was informative. I know, please don't get into a flame argument war about this. I know there are people who hold completely different points of view. I don't want to argue about it. I'm just sharing my point of view born out of experience. Okay, so I have to say, if you've got an interesting, logical, coherent argument with some evidence that you can bring to it, I by all means share it. I'm happy to be to learn stuff, but I don't want to. I don't want you to pitch dogma at me. My points of view, my understanding of something is born out of experience. And I just haven't got time for shouting dogmatic or arguing dogmatic views. So a rule on my videos, please, if you have a differing point of view, give me credible or meaningful evidence, or you know, tell me what you've learned from your experience which add up to an argument. Argument first, ideally supported by evidence, even if it's experiential, but not dogma, okay, just because you think it isn't the case. I don't want to waste your time and mine. So anyway, there you go. That's my experience of neck pocket cracks. Just an observation here. I definitely bought this guitar ages ago because it was specifically ripped to shreds here. This was a guitar that didn't just have a couple of cracks. This was literally hanging off. It was shredded through and through with cracks. Everything was broken around this neck pocket. I mean, you know, whether it had been dropped and smashed or whatever. But I bought this because I wanted to have a guitar that I didn't care that much about at the time, so I could just get stuck in and see what it took to fix it. Now what I did was I literally prized, to explore it, I prized apart what I could see of the cracks. I scraped back the lacquer, I looked at what I found, and I glued whatever I could. Now the result, actually, with gluing and clamping, was a rock solid neck heel, which is neck pocket, which is great. I did a very amateurish at the time hand-painted repair because I wasn't really ever planning to sell this. I really enjoyed playing this guitar. It's a really nice vintage Sunn Mustang, and actually you can tell how much I liked keeping it because it's got a ridiculously low reloved number 32. But as I say, it was bought specifically to test out and explore neck pocket cracks, and what I found was, you know, you can put this together and you can repair them, and that's what I tend to do. But I never follow the line that it's just in the lacquer, and I would, unless you've got a really compelling argument that convinces you otherwise, I would suggest that you always start from the understanding that this is about mechanical forces, not about some strange mysterious expansion of the wood which just happens to only crack the lacquer in the place where only the neck pocket cracks under mechanical force. Those sort of clues are what give it away for me, and that's kind of my logical approach to it. So the other thing, of course, finally to say is that if you do buy a guitar with those hairline cracks, even if you assume, as I do, that it's a physical mechanical damage that's occurred in the past, it doesn't by any means mean that it can't be played or it is inherently unstable. The decision to make on the guitar is actually if the thing moves too much in its pocket. I don't mean flexing the neck, as you can see any guitar will do. That's the elasticity of the neck. But if you do that and the thing goes, and you can feel it moving around this shattered pocket, then you do have a problem with your cracks. And the truth as well is that they won't get any bigger by themselves. It's not like there's some continual force acting on them. If it's cracked because of an oversized neck pocket, that's your lot. It cracks to accommodate and release the stress, if you like. It doesn't get any worse. It won't. If your guitar plays when you buy it and you like it, it's not going to destroy itself one day and suddenly just shatter into pieces. But what is also probably logically true of it is that it is weaker than it would be had that not happened. So it won't withstand as many knocks on the headstock while you're gigging as a guitar that hasn't had those cracks. It's just a common sense sort of thing. But don't be afraid of having them. And if you do have one, do the decent thing and tell the seller when you're listing it and selling it. There's nothing, I have to say, there is nothing as disappointing as buying a guitar on eBay that the seller has described as immaculate, and in some cases has even answered specifically when he said, are there any cracks in the neck pocket around the neck heel? Has said, no, it's all absolutely pristine, spotless, and you get it, and lo and behold, there are cracks. Right? That's so depressing, and it so undermines the kind of trust system in eBay. So if you do have the cracks, confess, own up to it, list it, show it in your pictures, and be honest about, is the neck stable, is the pocket stable? Yes, there's a crack. Don't get caught up in this, it's only in the lacquer. The minute I read that, I know you're trying to hide something, or you're just towing the line, and I will price it in my head accordingly, that it is a structural crack that I have to then list again in future when I sell on. Right? And there aren't many simple ways of repairing it in terms of finish. The thing about a crack, once it's cracked, unless you can glue everything rock solid together, it has this amazing thing of it'll keep propagating. Right? Once it's weakened, not even any glue will prevent it from reopening if it wants to. Okay, so you can never perfectly fix it. Now on this one, I fixed it, but you can see some sort of dimples, because what happens is the finish eventually, even when you think you've got it smooth, eventually sinks further into that crack. It'll go further than you want, and you'd have to keep on working, kind of refinishing a year later. So it's a long old process. You can eventually get rid of it, but you know, it's a weakness, and it will either re-crack there on an impact, or it will, the lacquer will sink into that crack as far as it can find. Even if you didn't manage to glue that far, it'll find it. So there you go, neck pocket cracks. Not really that bad a problem, but be upfront about it and price your guitars accordingly. You know, a guitar in otherwise good condition with a neck pocket crack is not perfect. It's as simple as that. It has taken a knock and it is weaker in some respects, and it is cosmetically not immaculate, so don't list it as such. Okay, there we go. Speak to you soon.